Welcome back to Tide Pod on the YouTube home of Tide Illustrated. Jack Knowlton, Tony Sukalis back with another preview for you guys. Alabama taking on Mercer, and I have bad news off the jump for you, Tide fans. This game's on SEC Network Plus. I know that often rubs SEC fans the wrong way. Gotta have the streaming service of some sort or pay for SEC Network Plus if you want to watch this game. But Alabama is taking on Mercer. 1 p.m. Saturday, like I said, on SEC Network. So, hopefully people can maybe do some free trial situations if you're not going to this game. But Tony Alabama's back in Bryant-Denny and back off of off a phenomenal win over LSU. We saw some shaky responses the last time that this team had a big win, of course, looking back to Georgia. Obviously, Mercer is even more down in the pecking order. To be fair to them, they are a top 10 FCS team, but Alabama, that's been a little bit of the message this week, is the whole no rat traps type thing. But I don't know how worried you have to be about that with Mercer. But we've obviously talked to coaches, players all week long. What's been your general vibe this week heading into the de facto cupcake week in the SEC? I'll just put it how it is.
9-1 Mercer. Like if Alabama was to fall flat like they did against Vanderbilt and lose this game, I don't know if the board would make it out of Bryant-Denny Stadium. I think people would just absolutely lose their minds. That being said, I don't think that's going to be a problem for Alabama, regardless of how it plays. I do think Mercer is on the good side of an FCS school. Maybe that would be like something that like Nate Oates would. He likes to do everything like at the maximum. So this would be the cupcake that he would choose. But it's still a cupcake. I mean, Alabama should roll over Mercer. I think it's just a matter of you're going to look at sharpness. You're going to look at like third downs. And so I think that's what we're kind of looking for. I think the team is as locked in as you are going to be heading into this game. But I think there is probably an understanding that it is Mercer. I don't think you're playing anybody injured. I wouldn't be surprised. They don't have to give an injury report this week because it's not an SEC game, but I wouldn't be surprised if you had a few notable guys sit out. And I don't necessarily think that that's because they're hurt, like long term. I think it's just a good game to give somebody, if you're banged up, a rest, especially with the depth you have at some areas. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw there's a couple positions where I think maybe a starter could be rested for sure.
Yeah, I think that's a good point of it. And to go back, like I ask you every week heading into these games, what kind of vibe has been. Last week I really noticed an uptick for me for LSU. Like it just kind of felt like the team was in a good kind of energy place. They didn't seem too apprehensive, and granted, we only see them for, a couple minutes to an hour a day or however much you want to call it. We're not around the facility at all hours, but it just seemed like last week, the way players and coaches were responding to questions and the way they were looking ahead to that game, they just felt very locked in, but also, not too high strung, not too, stiff, not too nervous about the game, had kind of a confidence about them. And that to me really, stuck out. And then obviously they had a really good game. And now it seems like they've kind of turned a corner. So obviously not going to read in too much about how, the coach's response and players' response to questions heading into Mercer. But that to me, just going back to last week, felt kind of like a representation of the corner that it seems like this team has turned, if you agree.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of leaders kind of step up. I mean, we've heard some about Tyler Booker's leadership. I mean, obviously that's not a surprise. He's the team captain, but we're recording this on Wednesday, and we had heard about Jahad Campbell's message to the team that, if you're not going to give it your all in practice, then you don't need to be here. And I think that's a huge statement, especially heading into a game like Mercer. I think that's, the right mentality you want to have. And it's really easy to kind of maybe ease off the brakes in a week like this. But if you have leaders like Jahad Campbell, that's going to be, big. And it's going to be big in keeping the team on the right footing for when it plays Oklahoma and Auburn. And like, you don't want to get too ahead of yourself if you do win that and you make the playoff. You're going to need to have that same mindset. So I think that, from a vibe standpoint, Alabama is in a good spot. I think you're really starting to see the leaders step up. And then if you look at how this team's responded following the Tennessee loss, I mean, what is it? Yeah, I'm not good at math, but 42 plus whatever they're 35, right? So I mean, like they're beating they're beating teams like 75 to 13 or whatever. They've really responded well since that loss. So I think you just have to kind of believe in this team and its leadership until they prove otherwise right now.
Yeah, I would totally agree. It feels like a corner's been turned. I'm glad you brought up Jihad Campbell. It's kind of wild. Obviously, Deontay Lawson's a great leader himself, but it sometimes surprises me when I hear Jihad Campbell answer questions and talk to people that he isn't a captain himself, because he just seems like a guy that makes you kind of want to run through a wall. When he talks to you, he talked about after the LSU game, playing with violent intentions, and it almost got me fired up listening back to his quotes and writing about that, just because he obviously had a good game after that, and clearly it motivates his teammates. And so that's a guy that I think Alabama's been leaning on more. I completely agree with you on that. But
yeah, leadership's different. I mean, like you
yeah,
don't always have to be a captain to necessarily be a leader. There's a lot of guys that are well respected on the team, that aren't necessarily leaders. I'm trying to think of one that just like stands
Tim
out.
Keenan's another one that
Tim
comes to
Keenan.
mind.
Tim Keenan has won leadership awards, behind the scenes, but is not a leader. I mean, I think Tim Keenan, he'll be here next year. Jihad Campbell likely won't be here next year. He's probably going to be in the NFL. I would be really shocked if Tim Keenan wasn't a team captain next year. But a great example of a guy that's like not a team captain but a leader. Q Robinson. I mean, he's injured now. He's out for the season. But example of a guy that is a leader without being a team captain for sure.
Yeah, there's some just good ones on this defense. I feel like we talked early season before he got hurt. Keon Sabb, another one, newcomer, helping that younger secondary out. That's a good segue. You mentioned Q Robinson, Tony, because obviously we found out Monday that he is out for the season, which really unfortunate. DeBoer and Kane Womack had some really glowing things to say about him. Obviously a fifth-year guy, like you just said, leader for this team. Really kind of showed a lot of these younger guys the way so far this year, and will, I'm sure, continue to do so. But obviously that hurts Alabama from a leadership standpoint. Also, his impact on the field at that Wolf position has been just huge all year, and now Alabama has to go forward in a key area without him. Who do you kind of look at to step up in his place, and what do you make of Alabama's kind of situation there with him out for the rest of the year?
Well, on top of Q Robinson, you also have Keanu Coat, who's kind of injured, or no, sorry, it's kind of suspended, and we don't know how long that suspension is. So without those two, it really kind of hurts your depth. I think Quay Russaw is the obvious answer because he has already started before he was banged up. He's kind of the thickest of the unit too, so he can kind of handle those early downs. He's great at setting the edge against the rush. He can really do it all, but I think in those early downs, he's really strong and was probably already going to be a steady option even with Q Robinson. And then the other guy I expect to really step up and to get a lot more opportunities because Quay was already getting his opportunities. I think Yanzi Pierre is a 5-star kid. I think he has a lot of the pass rushing abilities. If you wanted to put him in more of as a specialist, he's a guy that can get into the backfield really quickly. Kind of just a freak athlete, and he's gotten a lot bigger since he's came in. He didn't play last year, just like Quay Russaw didn't. But at the same time, I think he's made huge strides since then, and I think he could be a guy that could really step up, a name to watch. If you're not familiar from his recruiting process, he's the cousin of Courtney Upshaw, and Alabama fans know how disruptive Courtney was. Kind of different builds, but same kind of hard-nosed mentality between the two players. And he's a Eufaula native from Alabama, so it really means a lot to him. And I'm expecting him to have a good ascension now that he's going to see his role increase. And then the other option as well, we talked about Jihad Campbell. He's a guy versatile enough to kind of move to that Jack linebacker position, Wolf linebacker. I'm using old terminology, but that Wolf linebacker position, in addition to playing middle linebacker, Alabama has some depth at middle linebacker. So I expect to see Jihad there as well. between those three, I think Alabama kind of covers that role. Obviously, you're going to miss Q Robinson, but at the same time, you have his leadership behind the scenes. I think that's going to be pretty influential, especially with those younger guys we mentioned with Quay and Yanzi, two redshirt freshmen. I think Q Robinson's going to be right there in their corner, kind of talking them up from the sidelines and doing everything he can to help.
Yeah, him and Christian Robinson will have to team up. Of course, the linebackers coach who runs that Wolf room. I think you make a really good point about Jahad Campbell too. I'm kind of thinking a long-term prediction here. I wonder if in a game we see him do what Tyler Booker did on the offensive line when they needed him to play left tackle for a game, and he just lines up at Wolf, and that's I wonder if they really find the alignment better there or something. We could see what happens there.
I don't think you have to do it for a whole game because let's not forget, like, Quay Russell started the season as the starting Wolf. So I mean, it wasn't even Q Robinson. Q Robinson was kind of more a pass rush specialist, and then he kind of started playing a little bit more after Quay got hurt. So I think you have the options, but it definitely makes sense to keep your best players on the field. And if you have, Alabama's really high on Justin Jefferson at inside linebacker too. So if you think he can cover the inside linebacker position while Jahad Campbell's out there playing Wolf, then you can make those different packages. I think it's just something they'll experiment with. But I think in an ideal world, you just have one of those other guys kind of step up, and then you just kind of take advantage and pick and choose the times that you put Jahad. And it's really less about necessity with Jahad playing Wolf than it is, maybe trying to exploit something.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're spot on. Where it's ultimately, if Quay Russaw can just come in and be the destroyer that he was at the beginning of the season, that's what you'll take all day long. And yeah, you make a great point. I mean, on that depth chart, initially he was listed ahead of Q Robinson before he ran into some injury trouble. So, looking for kind of a resurgent an opportunity to kind of resurge for Quay Russaw, of course, also an Alabama native from Montgomery over at Carver. So. Looking to rep the in-state ties as well. So yeah, and that'll be an interesting thing to watch both against Mercer and I think going forward. Tony, I think everyone knows or realizes if you're listening at this point of the podcast, we're not going to probably do a super in-depth preview on the Mercer Bears. No offense to them. We've talked about some things on Alabama's front, but I think, we did this last week, and I think we're going to continue to do it until the season ends. The college football playoff rankings have dropped again, or updated for a new week, the second ever edition, I guess, or second edition of this season. Alabama moving up one spot to number 10. They are the number 10 team in the nation. They would get technically the number, I believe, 10 seed as well on the bracket, if I have that right.
Doesn't affect them with the switcheroos.
Yeah, so they're also the 10 seed in the bracket. If the season were to end today, which is my favorite hypothetical, they would actually have to go to Bloomington, Indiana, and play the Hoosiers. But Tony, you kind of wrote about something interesting that I think is worth talking about with Alabama's college football playoff, sort of expectations. And, there's always debates on how much you talk about it at this point of the season. Still a lot of football left to go. And you mentioned that, but Alabama only moving up one spot. They were 11 last week. And you kind of wrote about the teams in front of them and if there's maybe a ceiling for Alabama as to how far they can rise. It seems like with that win over LSU, they've played their way in, assuming they just win out and don't have any more hiccups in their last three games. But, what are your kind of thoughts on how far this team maybe could go, especially, with where the SEC championship could be and all that for them?
Well, first of all, assuming that things there's a very good possibility. Now, Missouri would have to beat Arkansas, which I know it doesn't seem 100% likely, but there's a good path out. And I won't, it's too complicated to break it down without seeing it. So, but there's a good path that Alabama could have of making the SEC championship game. So let's start off before we even talk about that. There is a chance Alabama makes the SEC championship game, and none of this matters because then they'll just, they'll play for the first round by trying to win the title. But if not, let's say Alabama doesn't get to go. There's another. I saw a possible, even a likely scenario where it's LSU in Texas. I think so. As wild as that seems, so that there's avenues where Alabama won't make the conference championship game, so they'll have to enter as an at-large. You start looking at the list of teams in front of Alabama, and it's kind of like, who are they going to pass? You can write off Miami and BYU. right off the bat, because whether Alabama is past them or whether they lose, they're going to be replaced by another conference champion. So the Big 12 will get a spot. The ACC will get a spot, or if one of those two don't get a spot, then Boise will come in and take it. Like Alabama's not going to get one of those spots. So those spots in the ranking don't necessarily matter. I guess there's like a crazy, scenario where teams would just get, I guess there's you could find a scenario where it matters a little bit, but it just doesn't. I think you knock off those when you're talking about how far Alabama can climb. You look at like a Notre Dame and a Penn State. Those are the two that I look at as like teams where Alabama already has a better resume. Alabama's still going to have a better resume at the end of it, but the committee so far hasn't moved Alabama ahead because they have that extra loss. I don't see that changing. I don't think that Alabama can do anything now unless the committee just decides to change their heart and say that, Alabama's, overall resume is just so much better than Penn State's or Notre Dame's. I don't see that changing because Alabama doesn't have a ranked game on its schedule either. So if you're not already more impressed with Alabama's schedule, you're not going to be more impressed. I think you're so consumed, if you're the committee right now, with that second loss that Alabama has, that you're not looking past that. So I don't think you're going to see a 2-loss Alabama jump a 1-loss Penn State or a 1-loss Notre Dame. And unfortunately for Alabama, I don't think either of those teams lose. I mean, if you look at, let's pull up, Penn State's going to go at Purdue, at Minnesota, and versus Maryland. 3 Big Ten bottom dwellers. You've got Notre Dame going versus Virginia, versus Army, and then at USC. I just don't see them losing any of those 3 games either. So Alabama's not passing too. So that's 4 teams now that you can't pass.
Hey, Army undefeated.
Yeah,
I'm just going to bat for the Black Knights.
Yeah, but then, like, what happens then if Army?
Right.
If Army wins that one, do they move ahead of Alabama as an undefeated team? Does the committee just get super impressed with Army?
It'd be wild.
Don't know. You look at Tennessee at 7 as a team where you're like, okay, that's not too far of a jump, and Tennessee might lose to Georgia this week. Well, Tennessee's 8-2. 8-1. They would be 8-2. Alabama would be 8-2. They have the same record. Alabama would have a better resume, but Tennessee would have the head-to-head win. And I just don't see the committee ignoring that head-to-head win. That would be interesting because there's different ways you can spin it. I mean, Alabama would have then beat Georgia and Tennessee would have lost to Georgia. But I think that head-to-head win, if you're banking on passing Tennessee, that's not, super likely. So we go up to number 5, Indiana. This is a team I actually do think that Alabama could jump. If Indiana was to lose to Ohio State in 2 weeks, and Alabama finishes 10-2 and Indiana finished 11-1, because of Indiana's resume and because they would no longer have this aura of an undefeated team, I could see Alabama jumping Indiana for a spot. So that would move up Alabama to 9. Outside of that, I mean, I think if Ohio, on the flip side, I think a 2-loss Ohio State, Alabama might be able to pass. I think you would pass Ohio State, but I think for Alabama to do that, the loss would have to be to Indiana, and they would not play in the Big Ten championship. I think that a 10-2 Alabama can pass a 10-2 Ohio State. I don't think a 10-2 Alabama can pass an 11-2 Ohio State, if that makes sense. I think if Ohio State plays against and has 2 losses to Oregon, I think that they'll still take Ohio State over Alabama. And then the only other one that I could maybe see, if Texas somehow loses another game, once again, probably not in the SEC championship game, because I'm not sure how much they're going to punish SEC championship losers or conference championship losers in general. I could see Alabama going above a 2-loss Texas for sure, because I think Texas is one of those teams. It's kind of like Penn State and Notre Dame, where they don't really have a good resume. You can make the argument. I've made plenty of argument of why Penn State is at 4. I don't know why Penn State's at 4. Really, I don't really know why Texas is at 3. They haven't done anything. They lost to Georgia. Their best win, I think, is Vanderbilt right now. So they're a team that I think could fall with a loss. So it's interesting. We could have a whole separate discussion of whether or not Alabama wants to go to the SEC championship game, because I was going to say as well. But I hope I didn't confuse the listeners too much with that mumbo jumbo, but basically there's not a lot of room for Alabama to climb unless we see some significant upsets.
Yeah, and I mean that's the thing you can kind of caveat all of this with is that college football has been chaos this season, and inevitably there will probably be some chaos before the SEC championship games. But I think to summarize your point, it seems like a lot of chaos is going to happen, and there's not many teams it can happen to that will favor Alabama to keep rising. But I think at this point, if you're an Alabama fan, especially given where you were at in that Vanderbilt, South Carolina, Tennessee stretch, you're probably just happy you're in the playoff. You're playing your best football at that point, and then you go from there. And obviously, if comes a scenario where they reach the SEC championship, that's another discussion, like you said.
I've made the argument that Alabama is still even better off if you're looking at making the second round of the playoff. Okay, I personally feel that Alabama's chances of making the second round of the playoff are better if they don't make the SEC championship game. And now you can say, oh, well, if you win the SEC championship game, you get an automatic bye. Well, not really, because if you play in the SEC championship game, we don't know how the committee is going to treat the conference champion losers. So if Alabama goes 10-2, they're definitely in, I would say. But if they go 10-3, are they in? I don't know. I think that opens up a door. I think you're probably then playing, you might sneak in as the 12th or 11th seed at that point. But I think if Alabama, they run a real risk of not making the playoff if they lose in the SEC championship game. So I think the playoff would then start that week. So if you look at it as, what's an easier path, I think your first round matchup on the road, let's say like currently it's Alabama or Indiana. I think that's easier if you're trying to decide your playoff fate than playing, Texas in the SEC championship game. Like so I don't necessarily think it's, I think it's an easier path. I think obviously the SEC title path would be more prestigious and you have the advantage of getting a bye, but I almost don't even see it as a bye because I think you're playing your first playoff game a week earlier than everyone else, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a complicated situation. If I was Alabama, I wouldn't necessarily. I guess you always want to try to play for a title. So if you asked Alabama, they're going to want to have that chance. But just from a pure logistics standpoint, I don't think they're in better shape. I think you kind of almost root for Arkansas to beat Missouri, and then you just stay in there with a 10-2 season, a 10-2 regular season record. You probably get, like I said, the 9 or 10 seed, and you probably play it. I mean, shoot, if you got the 9 seed, maybe you're playing 8 seed Penn State, which I think is a bye week anyways, because I think there's no way that Penn State should be hosting a playoff game. So there's a lot of ways this can spin, but I personally feel like Alabama will be just fine if it wins the rest of its games, regardless of whether it plays in the SEC championship game or not.
Yeah, I think you make a good point about what they're going to do when that inevitably happens, whether it's to Alabama, whether it's to an SEC team, or whether it's to a team in a different Power 4 conference. There's a lot of weird sort of scenarios that can still play out. And like I said, a lot of time left until that. And, again, it's pointless to ask Kalen DeBoer or any of the players because what they'll say is we're focused on Mercer and then, focused on Oklahoma, focused on Auburn, the next opponent in front of you. So we'll see how it all shakes out. But I think it's interesting. We'll obviously keep monitoring, the college football situation as it goes forward. Turning back to this game, Tony, briefly, and again, it's tough. There's a lot of questions I feel like I get every year about why teams choose to play games like this at this point of the season. That again is a whole different discussion. But when you look at Alabama in this game, and you talked about the opportunity to get some rest for maybe some starters that are maybe a little banged up, and some of these other things, what happens in this game for you that truly makes it a worthwhile experience other than having adding a win, obviously, to your win column? I mean, what do you want to see from this game, in terms of where Alabama's at in this season that will give you, some sort of, whether it's positive reinforcement or just something good to look forward to, or some sort of momentum they can even create, if that's even possible against an opponent like this?
I mean, first off, no injuries. I know it sounds, basic, but just no injuries. You can't have anyone hurt in this game. If somebody's feeling at all injured, don't risk it because I don't think it's going to be a close game. When you look at these kind of games, the thing I always look for is um, situations, right? If there's a 3rd and 8, can Alabama convert a 3rd and 8? Just those, can Alabama get off the field when it forces a 3rd and 8? Like those kind of things. Those situations, I know, the talent level is different, but it still says a lot about a team of how they handle those situations. Penalties, is Alabama going to continue to, play discipline, or is it going to make, a bunch of careless mistakes? I think those are things you look for. Maybe you try to do some things in the passing game, but really, I don't think you want to show too much against a Mercer anyway. So I kind of say you probably keep the game plan somewhat vanilla. So between just doing the small things right, and winning in certain key situations, I think there's not really much you can take from a game like this. I think you just kind of gotta hope that you see the right mentality from the players while they're out there, and then hope that they leave the game in pretty good shape, and then you turn your focus to Oklahoma and Auburn and finishing this season out.
Yeah, I think I completely agree. Just situational stuff, injuries, keeping everybody, on the field that you want. And then, yeah, I think you look at, how your backups play and how ready some of those guys seem to be, even if it's against Mercer, you knew this game was coming. If you're a reserve player, how do you step up and take advantage of whatever snaps you get and, maybe create some positive momentum and vibes for yourself going forward as you try and take a bigger role next season? I'm not thinking of anybody in particular here, just a general, kind of feeling that I think Alabama's reserve should kind of have.
I mean, like, if you look at how many more reps is Ty Simpson going to get, in-game reps is he going to get before the end of the season? I think, I mean, maybe Alabama blows out Oklahoma. Maybe they blow out Auburn, but none of those, those games aren't necessarily guaranteed blowouts. I mean, Oklahoma has a good defense, so that just might be an ugly game that Alabama wins comfortably, but not maybe a game that you're putting in Ty Simpson for extended reps, or, I mean, a lot of times if Ty Simpson's going to be in the game in an SEC game, he's running out the clock. So it's not really the same. I think, if you give him a couple of quarters, it at least gives him in-game reps to work with. And that's, at the moment, you're likely a starter at quarterback next season. So there's only a certain amount of in-game reps he has. You're not going to get him in the playoff, and barring an injury to Jalen Milroe. And then we're talking a whole different story. So I think that kind of stuff might be important, just getting those reps. But I don't really know how much you're going to judge Ty Simpson's success against Mercer to, whether or not he's a good quarterback. It will be nice to see him, but I don't think you can judge too much. That's too small of a sample size against an overwhelmed opponent to really, make any snap decisions.
Yeah, definitely. That is a very good point, though. Is just he's getting reps. I mean, you think back to what happened in that Chattanooga game last year, and try to not repeat that, at least one particular play. Of course, for Ty Simpson,
it's a shame that he's like remembered for that play, because it was a great play. You know what I'm saying? It's like, to me, that play shows off his athleticism. It's like, no, people don't think of Ty as necessarily a runner, because, I mean, when you look at him compared to Jalen, I mean, when you look at anyone compared to Jalen, they're not a runner. But I mean, Ty can move to a certain extent. I think Ty can move. I was gonna say Jake Coker, but he can move better than Jake Coker can. But in that, maybe like a little bit like Tua can move. You know what I'm saying? Like, I think that Ty, he's not a runner, but if you need him to tuck it and run, I think he can get you some yardage. So that's what I look at that play for. But yeah, it's don't make any bonehead decisions like that will overshadow your career until. I think people are going to associate that with Ty Simpson until he becomes a starter and starts making other plays.
No doubt.
Kind of forget about.
No doubt. Yeah, I think that's that's just how it is. Those are the ones everyone remembers. It'd be interesting to see if some boneheaded play, whether it's by Simpson or somebody else, happens and how DeBoer kind of reacts. Could get ugly. One thing I do want to ask you quickly, before we roll into predictions, and analyzing it going forward for this game is a little bit hard. But one thing that was interesting to me that stood out this week was the offensive line, and it stood out against LSU. Tyler Booker kind of talked about how they changed up some of their play calling and just communication on the offensive line. He said, he was the one putting his head between his legs, looking at Jalen Milrow or let Parker Brailsford kind of look up and scan the defensive line to make calls before snapping it. He was also tapping on Parker Brailsford to indicate, that he was good to go. They changed some of that stuff up and said, Booker said it, Chris Kapilovich said it this week, and kind of said that really worked for this offensive line. Obviously, you're not really going to see how well it works against Mercer, but seemed like in that area of the field, maybe something you look for them to keep doing, for the rest of the season.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe you don't do that against Mercer just because you don't have
Right.
to. That's something you normally do out of need. I mean, you
Don't put it
in
on
that
film.
scenario. Well, no, it's not even that. I think when you're doing a silent count like that, you're kind of giving away your snap because you can see whenever Tyler Booker's tapping Parker Brailsford. It's just a matter of necessity. So in a perfect world, you don't have to do that. It's just something that works in a noisy environment. It's better than the alternative of bad snaps. So that's something I think they probably work on behind the scenes and make sure, especially going into Oklahoma. And that's the last, that's Oklahoma is really the last true road game that they'll face until I guess never mind, maybe the playoff, but I'm not used to the playoff having campus sites now. But
yeah.
other than that, I mean, you're going to have less true road environments. So it'll be able to, there'll still be noisy environments in the playoff. Regardless, maybe if they advance to the second round in a bowl site, those can still get noisy. So maybe they'll have to use it there. But that's something I think that you practice behind the scenes. And if they're doing it against Mercer, it'd almost be a real disrespect to Mercer because it would just literally just be a practice. You'd be handicapping yourself for the sake of practicing. So I don't think that they'll do that.
Yeah, I don't think they'll do it against Mercer either. It was just sort of a development I noticed, that seems like it's another thing trending in the right direction for this team, getting more comfortable doing things like that. Like you said, when they possibly have to encounter another noisy environment in Bloomington, Indiana, Tony. I mean, that's a well-known football atmosphere, so got to be prepared for that.
Some of the others, I mean, but you say that we joke about Indiana, but I mean, like, could be Penn State, it could be Oregon, it could be Ohio State, it could be Tennessee, it could be Tennessee again.
Tennessee?
I mean, somehow I think there's a way that it could be Tennessee again. So yeah,
the way for it all.
Yeah. So there's some loud environments that Alabama could definitely be a part of.
No doubt. And yeah, that'll just be interesting to see I'm curious to see how that goes forward, and it'll be loud in Oklahoma next week. So I wonder, what maybe goes on there, but let's roll into predictions for this one, Tony. We could keep it short and sweet if you'd like. I do have my score and player to watch already in my head. Would you like me to go first? You, by the way, last week had the closer score. You had 34-24. I had 38-35. So by the margin of victory, you had the better score. I will pat myself on the back, however. I did pick Jalen Milrow as my player to watch. He had a pretty good game. Just pretty good game against the Tigers. So I'll take that. I'll take a win in that one. But
I'll go ahead. I'm gonna go ahead. What do we have for a spread? What do we have for a spread?
We don't. We don't have one. They have not put one on ESPN Bet that I've seen. I don't know how many sites are going to let you bet on this one.
Okay, I think I'm going to go 45-3 for this one. I always feel bad about picking a shutout. I think that Alabama's defense is rolling along, and I wouldn't necessarily count out a shutout, but I'm going to leave a little bit of room for a weird kick return or an interception that puts them in field goal position or something like that. I think, you're going to see the ground game continue to roll. I think Alabama is obviously going to make more explosive plays. Maybe put Ryan Williams has been kind of quiet. I think this is a good game to kind of get him into the game with a big passing play to kind of make people remember who he is. But my player to watch that I'm going to pick is Richard Young. I think that he's going to, somebody we talked to this week, I think, he's had to wait his turn. I think he's going to get increased carries this week just because, you probably want to keep some of your backs pretty fresh. And he's made the most of his carries in the last couple of weeks. I think he's going to have another big game, break off a big run, and probably get in the end zone again.
I like it. That's a good pick. I was a lot more mean than you were because I also have Mercer getting 3 points. I also didn't want to pick a shutout. I think it would be really funny if they managed to shut out an SEC team this year, but not Mercer. But I went 63-3. I went way
Oh,
off the.
I was sick for the
Way,
9-1 Mercer Bears. Come on now.
I am. I'm totally disrespecting them. I don't know what to tell you. Sorry, Mercer. I'm going 63-3. My player to watch in this game is someone we actually mentioned earlier, and it is one of the men filling in for Q Robinson. I'm going Yanzi Pierre. I think he gets some extra snaps. I think he gets the chance to kind of show off his 5-star skills. And I like Pierre as my player to watch in this one. And yeah, I'll go 63-3. So all right, there's our predictions for the game. We will see how well the Mercer Bears fare. Pulled off a great upset on the hardwood against Duke. Maybe they'll do something similar on the gridiron against Alabama. Probably not. But there's our picks. Let's roll into
our there because you'll see the edit here, and I'm gonna out myself right here for this. I was pulling up the odds for this game, and I thought it was negative. I thought it was Alabama -29, and I was gonna tell Jack that like, hey, Mercer's. You know, I was like kind of I was looking into it, and I was like, hey,
Pro
Mercer's
Bears.
kind of, yeah, pro Bears here. And then it was a basketball. It was an old basketball line that Alabama had. So that's a fail on me. Brutal. It just shows you how big of a favorite Alabama is going to be, and how good Alabama basketball is that they were favored at one point to Mercer by 29 points.
That's true. That's true. Mercer, I did Mercer. The Mercer Bears basketball. They've had some good years, but yeah, Mercer I don't think
for SEC teams. I mean,
yes,
for every sport, yeah, it's really tough.
Yeah, they do like to match up against the Southeastern Conference. Yeah, but I don't think too many sites are letting you bet on this one. We'll see though. We'll see who's right. That's not stopping us from make picks. But we'll roll into our 5 picks of the week. Elsewhere in college football, some better games. Certainly ones with actual lines, which is good. Looking back to week 11 briefly. Tony, I have good news for you. You've taken a 23-22 lead overall. You had 3 correct picks last week. I myself only had 2. We did Georgia, Ole Miss, the Bulldogs. We both picked them. They lost. And then Ole Miss turned that into flipping a commit from Bama out of that. So they got to win over the Tide and the Bulldogs. Brutal stuff. Colorado and Texas Tech. I had the Red Raiders. They lost. Colorado, you picked the Buffaloes. Big win for Colorado, controlling their own destiny in the Big 12. The Holy War was an absolute battle. Utah against BYU, and it was the Cougars by 3. You did pick BYU, but Utah only lost that game by 1 point, and I had Utah, so I got that one right. Utah managed to cover against BYU. South Carolina, Vanderbilt, the Gamecocks went into the construction site and won. We both picked that game correct. And then Oklahoma, Missouri, an absolute chaos fest in Columbia. And it was the Tigers that came out with a 7-point win. They were Oklahoma was favored by 2.5. You picked Missouri, so you got that one right. That put you up 3-2 from last week.
I beat you by you picking against your alma mater. It's
true.
That's tough.
I have no faith.
That is a tough scene.
It's a tough scene. It's probably going to stay a tough scene because we're going to get to them right now. Because week 12. We're going to stay in with Missouri and South Carolina, 2 teams we picked last week. They're playing each other. It's a ranked game, and it's the Battle of the Columbias. Fun fact, Columbia, Missouri, South Carolina in Columbia, South Carolina. They do play for a trophy in this game. Number 23, Mizzou. Number 21, South Carolina. The Gamecocks, 12-point favorites at home. It's our biggest line this week. You picked Mizzou last week. We both picked South Carolina last week. Now they're playing. Who do you have?
I'm definitely taking South Carolina, even with the 12 points. I think a lot of my pick for Missouri was my lack of confidence in Oklahoma. I have a lot of confidence in South Carolina. I think you had mentioned in last week's pod how they could make a run. I believe I'm a believer, and I think that they roll. Maybe by like 20 points. You could raise this up and quite a bit, and I would still pick South Carolina in this game.
I'm right there with you. I'm going the Gamecocks. Brady Cook from Missouri is out for the season. I don't think even if he played in this game that Mizzou would have stood much of a chance. This South Carolina team is just a good football team, plain and simple. I think they're going to finish 9-3, and I like them, like you said, as 12-point favorites at home against the Tigers. Our next biggest spread, I'm going to go large to small this week. We're going over to the Big 12. Arizona State, unranked but 7-2. Going over to the Little Apple, Manhattan, Kansas, to play the number 16 ranked Kansas State Wildcats, who also, have a little bit of playoff prayers, at least in the Big 12. Kansas State, 8.5-point favorites at home. Do you like the Sun Devils, the newly anointed Big 12 squad, to do some damage, at least in Manhattan?
I feel like I've picked against Kansas State, like almost. Maybe I haven't, but I feel like I picked against them at every opportunity. So I'm not going to stop now. I'm picking the Sun Devils with the
All
points.
right, ASU
not,
for
not
Tony.
Not outright. Not outright. Let's not.
Yes,
let's not get crazy.
Just to cover. That's very fair. I'm going to flip. I'm going to go Kansas State. I really like this team. I think Avery Johnson, not the former Alabama men's basketball coach, the Kansas State quarterback, is very good, and I think he'll guide them to a win at home here. Next up, let's go to the American Athletic Conference, Tony. Big game at the top of that. 2-8-1 teams, excuse me, undefeated in conference play. Tulane. They are ranked 25th in the country. They are 7-point favorites on the road, playing the midshipmen of Navy. Of course, Navy, they dropped a game in AAC play, so they're not up there undefeated with Army anymore. They do have 2 losses, but if they win this game, they will be at the same conference record as Tulane, and we will be back on track for the Army-Navy American Conference Championship right before they play each other in the Army-Navy game, which I think would just be hilarious. That said, I think you like the Green Wave by 7 here. Am I right?
I would love it if Boise State somehow lost and then Tulane sneaks into the playoffs somehow. Because my mom's from New Orleans. I grew up rooting for Tulane, so I love Tulane, and they have a chance to win the American, and they're 6-0 in conference. They have 2 losses, but they both came out of conference. We're talking about a Tulane team that had a 7-point loss to Kansas State, a 15-point loss to Oklahoma. So they're not terrible. And they've really, they can score. They had a 71-20 game over UAB. Give me the Green Wave. I don't even remember what you said for points, but I'm taking the Green Wave because I got to go with my childhood team.
I respect it. I'm going to be different. Give me the Navy. The midshipmen probably to cover. I don't think I'm confident that they'll win outright, but I'll pick them to cover just for fun in that one.
I didn't risk it there.
Yeah, exactly. Next up, back to the SEC. This was an interesting line to me, and I think in almost every week I've picked the team that Alabama played last week as a game for their next game. We're doing that again. Number 22 LSU, the Tigers, the wounded Tigers after the Tide came into Baton Rouge and battered them. They are 4.5 favorites going to the Swamp, which I thought was a prevalent topic considering I don't know if we've had a chance to discuss, of course, Billy Napier getting the vote of confidence from Florida. But do you like the Gators as 4.5-point underdogs at home here?
No, I like LSU, and you would think maybe with 3 losses that their season was over. Actually, it's not, because if there's a definite path that they have, depending on, they have to have some things work out their way, but they have a spot in the SEC championship possibly, and I think that they're going to want to redeem themselves from that terrible performance that they showed against Alabama, and then B, they still have a postseason hope, so I think that always makes you play a little bit harder. Give me the Tigers to cover.
I like it too. I'm also taking LSU in this game. I think that team is better than they showed against Alabama. I do think Alabama, went in there and beat them. They were the better team. I think they are a better team, but I don't think LSU is as bad as they looked. I think a lot of things also went wrong for them in that game that probably don't go wrong too often for the rest of the year. I like LSU. And then to finish things out, I totally lied about the going from big to small in the spread, because this is actually our second biggest spread, but it's the most fun game on paper, at least. Tennessee, the Vols, going to Sanford Stadium, and maybe it's not a fun game depending on your outlook. Tennessee's number 7, Georgia's number 12. Georgia also coming off a loss to Ole Miss, trying to return home for a get-right game against the Volunteers side that I believe will be without Nico Iamaleava, their quarterback for this game. Only thing I know about the backup is that he threw one pass attempt against Alabama and it was picked. So that might be contributing to this line. But it is Georgia, 10.5-point favorites at home. Do you like the Dogs to cover there? Or do you like the Vols?
I'm not convinced that Nico's not going to play in this one. I know that there's been some speculation that he's not. That would obviously influence the line greatly. But either way, 10.5. I just think Georgia's going to come out firing. They're going to be pissed. Um, Add in the fact that Nico might be out. It's just a terrible time to play Georgia right now, and I just think everything's pointing towards a big blowout. 10.5 still a lot, but I'm saying this one maybe Georgia by 14. So give me the dogs, and give me them to cover as well.
You know what? I was going to be with you, and I like your logic. Like Kirby gets those guys fired up. I have lost all my faith in Carson Beck, and I think he has been absolutely shaken. And if there is a pass rush to further shake him, I know Georgia's offensive line is decent, but man, oh man, James Pierce is going to come after him, and I think he's going to force him to make some tricky throws. And I don't know if I trust his judgment anymore. I'm going to go Tennessee to cover in this one. They might not win, but I think this is another Georgia shaky game.
But this game being in Georgia makes a lot of difference for me. If this game was in Tennessee, I would take Tennessee. I mean, I think that would matter a lot. Some of the struggles that Alabama had against stopping this pass rush were noise based as well. I don't know. To see Georgia lay another egg at home, that would be rough.
Yeah, I'm probably overthinking this one, and then this is going to be this is the most obvious Georgia get right game ever. Especially if Nico doesn't play, then I'll toss my prediction probably gets tossed down the drain. But you know what? We'll go with it. We'll be cavalier this week and have some fun. So there you go. There are our picks for the week. There's our predictions for Alabama and Mercer. Enjoy the game. If you're going, return to T-Town for Alabama. I guess go figure out how to find an illegal stream. You didn't hear that from me. If you need to watch the game on TV and don't have SEC Network Plus. But yeah, good luck with all of that. And we will obviously recap the game after. Go subscribe to Tide Illustrated. Got some great content this week. Also went on the, subscribe to the board because we have all the notes about Caleb Cunningham's decommitment and the latest in recruiting as signing day comes up as well. So go subscribe there. Subscribe here on the YouTube if you have not already. We will see you next time.